London. It's not only the capital of the island and the heart of the kingdom. It's where the newest trends start and where traditions are kept. It is also a tranquil place. You could think that time stands still here. London's history goes back 2,000 years. The Romans had already founded a community here by 43 AD. Londinium quickly developed into a centre of trade. But the colony on the edge of the empire quickly became too expensive. In 410, the Romans abandoned their outposts on the island. Angles, Saxons, and Normans ruled the city in the years to follow. They have all left their mark in London. Our trip begins in the area of the city known as Westminster. This has been a centre of church and world power for a good 1,000 years. We will visit the Houses of Parliament, Westminster Abbey, and the seat of the Queen, Buckingham Palace. Right in the middle of this historical area is the world's most famous clock tower. This landmark gets its name from the 13-ton bell. Big Ben and the Houses of Parliament were built in the middle of the 1800s. Originally, this was the site of the medieval Westminster Palace. It was the royal residence for 400 years, up to the time of Henry VIII. In 1834, on an October night, the palace was completely burnt to the ground. Westminster Hall was all that survived the flames. This is where the coronations, law cases, and the first sessions of Parliament have taken place since time immemorial, where rulers lost power and celebrations were held. After the Great Fire, the architects Sir Charles Barry and Augustus Welby-Pugin won the contract for the reconstruction. Barry was responsible for the architecture, Pugin for the ornamentation and decoration. As a result, a neo-Gothic showpiece with around 1,100 rooms came into being. The Houses of Parliament, seat of the House of Lords and House of Commons. The Cabinet meets a few hundred metres away in Downing Street, a street which could be called an alleyway. The government meets on the ground floor of this famous building, number 10. The Prime Ministers always lived on the first floor, but Tony Blair broke this tradition. He and his family needed more space. They swapped with the Chancellor of the Exchequer and moved next door. For security reasons, Downing Street is closed to the public. In Whitehall, there is one ministry after the next, one office after the other. It is permitted to walk along here. Whitehall, the corridor of power, has become a synonym for government. This is where the English monarchy lived in the 16th and 17th centuries. They resided in Whitehall, the biggest royal palace in Europe. In 1698, it nearly burnt to the ground. Only Banqueting House survived. It was built by the King's architect, Inigo Jones. It was the first building in England which was influenced by the Italian Renaissance. At the beginning of the 17th century, this style became evident in Northern Europe. Peter Paul Rubens painted the ceilings in the banqueting hall. He was knighted by King Charles I for this work. Hardly surprising, the paintings paid homage to the Stuart dynasty, especially the achievements of Charles's father, James I. He united the kingdoms of England and Scotland. At the top end of the room, There is a copy of the King's Throne. Oliver Cromwell is believed to have sat on the original, a politician who fought against the monarchy. Westminster Abbey, another significant building, Coronation Hall and Royal Burial Place. A cloister had already been erected here by the 10th century. Edward the Confessor had a church built here later, hence the name Westminster, the minster to the west of the city centre. The only evidence of this construction is in the foundations. The church we now see was built later in 1245. It was continuously altered and enlarged up into the 18th century. The rose windows and the central nave are wonderful. Since William the Conqueror in around 1066, all the monarchs have been crowned there. Most of the royal funerals took place in the abbey. The gravestones and memorial statues do not only pay homage to English royalty, but also to statesmen and poets and other significant people in English history. And even to a German, Georg Friedrich Händel, composer at the Royal Court in London. On our way to another highly unusual church, we'll take a short detour to the police headquarters. New Scotland Yard was founded in the 19th century by Sir Robert Peel. The nickname Bobby comes from his name, Sir Robert. There, in the middle of hectic London, an Oriental style of architecture. Westminster Cathedral, seat of the Roman Catholic Church. The construction began in 1894. Almost 50 years after the Catholic Emancipation Act, equal rights with English Catholics were granted. The early Christian Byzantine style was chosen to distinguish it from Westminster Abbey. The cathedral was consecrated in 1910, although it was never completed inside. There was not enough money to adorn the bare bricks with marble and mosaics. Endless wealth and worldwide power. That's what Buckingham Palace once represented. Royal residence since 1887, George III bought the building from the Duke of Buckingham. The years-long alterations went over budget, so finally, instead of a feudal residence, a cheap version with only 600 rooms was made. One of the main attractions, the changing of the guard at 11:30 a.m. in the forecourt of the palace. It should be said that times do vary slightly. The Royal Guard is composed of 7 regiments. 2 are the cavalry, the Horse Guards. 5 regiments belong to the infantry, known as the Foot Guards.
You guard! Check! You guard! Change! Ah!
One of the cavalry's regiments brought their mascot with them, a ram. Only the Foot Guards wear red jackets and the famous bearskin hats. These hats came originally from Napoleon's soldiers. They were to be seen in England for the first time in 1831. The British are very proud of their history, and so it's no wonder that one is everywhere put in mind of the once glorious empire with so many ceremonies and rituals. It is not even so long ago. As recently as the 19th century, Great Britain blossomed again under Queen Victoria. The Victoria Memorial honours a woman who was crowned at the age of 18, raised 9 children, ruled for 64 years, and has a whole period of time called after her. She was already a legend in her own lifetime. In 1910, Sir Aston Webb erected the statue, which cost £250,000. It was financed purely from voluntary contributions. The Mall is also thanks to Sir Webb. It is an avenue for parades and pomp leading to Buckingham Palace. Also, to the north of this area, there are constant reminders of earlier centuries everywhere, even in the Grand St. James's Quarter. This is where the exclusive gentlemen's clubs were founded. Even now, they have a certain mystery, perhaps because they are only for the elite even up to the present day. The forerunners were the cafes. Over time, they metamorphosed more and more into haunts for artists, politicians, businessmen, dandies, and scientists. However, there were not only high-minded discussions held behind these doors. There was also a lot of drinking, eating, sleeping, and gambling, and women were not admitted. There are still the old established high-class shops in the district of St. James. One can purchase quintessential English goods in Burlington Arcade. It was the first indoor shopping arcade built in 1819. The new shopping mall is around the corner, New Bond Street. It is often necessary to have to ring a bell before one can enter a shop premises. Another of London's traditions, mounted police in the middle of the traffic chaos. They patrol the streets, pedestrian zones, squares, including Trafalgar Square, London's #1 meeting point. John Nash, the most important English town planner, designed this square. Lord Nelson is seated on a throne 50 metres high. Reliefs made out of melted French cannon guns are a reminder of his victories. In particular of the Battle of Trafalgar, when the British defeated the Franco-Spanish fleet. Nelson perished as well. This is where the royal stables used to be, but they had to be moved to make place for the memorial to England's most famous admiral. The pigeons belong to Trafalgar Square just as much as Nelson's column. Feeding pigeons is frowned upon in London, but it is a tourist attraction here. The 18th century Church of St. Martin in the Fields is to the northeast of the square. At the time of its construction, it was revolutionary to combine a high spire with a vestibule with Corinthian columns. James Gibbs, the architect, was emulated a lot later, especially in America. Concerts are frequently held during the week at lunchtime. The National Gallery. Fine art is exhibited here. With over 2,000 paintings, it is one of the leading museums in the world. Among the old masters exhibited here are Titian, Botticelli, and Da Vinci. The works of the Flemish and Dutch schools are no less significant. Take, for example, Jan van Eyck, the Arnolfini Wedding, Vermeer, Bruegel, and naturally Rembrandt too. The collection of French Impressionists and Post-Impressionists like Van Gogh is extraordinary. The National Portrait Gallery is right around the corner, the biggest portrait collection in the world and a mirror of English history. Pictures of people who were in the public eye in Britain are exhibited. Amongst others, Henry VIII, his daughter from his second marriage, Queen Elizabeth I, and the humanist Thomas Morris, the actor and dramatist Shakespeare, and Charles Dickens, author of Oliver Twist. We haven't seen much of London life. We'll make up for that now. The programme includes Covent Garden with all the pubs, Soho and the theatre scene, as well as East London, the Tower, Tower Bridge and Docklands. Colourful shops, market stores, cafes, restaurants, bars, street artists and lots more. That's Covent Garden. This is where the vegetable, fruit and flower market was in the 17th century, and where Eliza Doolittle of My Fair Lady was supposed to have worked as a seller. Originally, this was an open space, the first of London's squares. Inigo Jones designed it after a model of an Italian piazza, but there is little left to be seen of it now. The three long covered market halls were built in the 19th century. In the 1870s, the main market was moved to the south of the Thames. The district was cleaned up. Elegant shopping arcades were built, which created an almost Mediterranean atmosphere. Whoever wants to really carouse doesn't stay around Covent Garden long. London's oldest restaurant is close by. The food is expensive in rules, but also very good. English cuisine is in fact better than its reputation. It is typically British as well to meet up sometime between 11 a.m. and 11 p.m. for an ale, or a bitter, or a lager. So it's no wonder that there are between 6,000 and 7,000 pubs in England. The Roman wine bars, the Anglo-Saxon alehouses, and the travellers' rest houses, which were called inns, are the predecessors of the pub. In the puritanical 19th century, these beer places were branded dens of iniquity. To distinguish themselves from these places, more and more public houses, places where drinking was orderly, sprung up. The so-called pubs were elegantly decorated, plush with lots of gilt and mirrors. Nowhere else in the world has such a wealth of pleasant pubs. Probably nowhere else has as many theatres as London. There are around 200 performances and 3 premieres to be seen every day. The streets around Leicester Square, the heartland of the theatre and music scenes. Most of the buildings date from the 19th century because the theatre scene boomed during the reign of Victoria. There aren't any flops here. There are only commercial productions here in the West End. The curtain rises as long as the box office does well. In this theatre, the till has been ringing since the beginning of the 50s. Agatha Christie's Mousetrap was an outstanding success here. Theatre tickets can be got for half price during the day here at Leicester Square. The bars and discos, gaming halls, multi-screen cinemas and souvenir shops are primarily a tourist attraction. They also meet up here at London's main junction, Piccadilly Circus. The dazzling, sparkling advertisement is a part of tradition. This is where, as early as 1890, the first electrically lit advertisement was installed. The statue of Eros on the fountain depicts the Angel of Charity. Piccadilly Circus is perhaps the centre point of London, but the heart, it is said, beats in Soho. There were fields here until the 1800s, where the nobles went hunting. They are meant to have called out "Soho" to the sound of the hunt. Fugitives from all lands came here in the end of the 17th century. Noteworthy famous people like Mozart, Rousseau, and Karl Marx came too. This part of town is always considered wild, but since street prostitution has been outlawed, Soho is once again what it always was, a multicultural village. The Chinese have established themselves to the south of the district and have built up their own community. The tourists come to Chinatown because one can eat first-rate food here, but no one knows what really goes on behind the facades, not even the native British. There is always the taking of protection money, blackmail, and the Chinese mafia. One thing is sure, though, that in locked cellars under supermarkets and restaurants, there are a lot of illegal gambling dens. That's only part of everyday London. Carnaby Street, quite the opposite. The most famous street in London gets by on the memories of the past and on the tourists who come here year after year. This is where swinging London had its beginning in the 60s. This was the fashion mecca with an abundance of crazy shops. Carnaby Street was the launching pad of the miniskirt that Mary Quant, the fashion designer, had designed in London. Nowadays, there are only a few boutiques for teenagers and souvenir shops selling rubbish left over from the 60s. The wild London youth and the totally way-out boutiques don't exist here anymore. The British Museum is to the northeast of Carnaby Street. Cynics maintain that this is the most famous robber's lair in the world. It is certainly one of the biggest treasure troves. Its 6 to 7 million exhibits show a cross-section of the complete history of culture. We'll limit ourselves to the archaeological collection as the whole collection is so vast. The archaeological collection is largely responsible for its international repute. The Elgin marbles are one of the biggest attractions. Lord Elgin had these sculptures brought from the Parthenon Temple in the ancient Athenian Acropolis to London. The Greek government has been trying to get the treasures back for years, but to no avail. The British maintained that without the work of the museum, the sculptures and the reliefs wouldn't exist anymore. The Assyrian, Sumeric, Persian, and Babylonian exhibits are also significant. Another highlight, the Egyptian collection. Lots of these art treasures are war booty. They were brought to England after Nelson's victory over Napoleon. Some of these are souvenirs or mementos of expeditions. The trail of events that brought them to this exhibition has long been lost. Admission is free. Accordingly, the museum, apart from during the morning hours, generally gets a lot of visitors. In the centre of London, there are quite peaceful places. Temple is an example, called after the Knights of the Temple. This is where the order, founded in the 12th century, had its headquarters. The Law Society has had its living, study, and working quarters here since the 1500s. The so-called Inns of Court, of which there are 4 in all in London. Every law student must sit his exams here. All the inns have their own library, church, and canteen for the students. Most of the quarters are used as offices because the Inns of the Court is a first-class address. In the middle of it all is the Temple Church, consecrated in 1185. The Holy Grave Church in Jerusalem was the inspiration for the round buildings. The altar was built in the 13th century. The 12th and 13th century gravestones of the Knights of the Temple are worth seeing. The journalists moved in close by to the lawyers. Fleet Street, known also as Ink Street, was home to the most important press offices for hundreds of years. But at the beginning of the 80s, there was a problem with the printing industry. A lot of the publishing houses had to leave the centre. The high-rises and some bars formerly frequented by journalists remain. Guests to Ye Old Cheshire Cheese here include Dickens and Voltaire. St. Paul's Cathedral sits in the middle of the purpose-built buildings and the noisy thoroughfares. It is the seat of the Catholic Bishop of London. Sir Christopher Wren, England's most brilliant architect, built it. The Romans had already built a temple on this site. More churches have been constructed here since the 7th century. The Roman Gothic building which once stood here was destroyed in the Great Fire of London. Fire broke out one September night, destroying nearly 80% of London. Only 12 people perished. Everything else was covered in soot and ashes. Work on the present-day cathedral began 9 years later. The dome is 365 feet high, 1 foot for every day of the year. That's 111 meters. The incredible acoustics in the Whispering Gallery are particularly impressive. Work continued on the cathedral for 35 years. It was completed in 1710. Wren took on a whole team of artists for the interior decoration. Lubens, a Dutch emigrant, the most famous wood carver of his day, worked on the choir stalls and the organ. Handel and Mendelssohn Bartholdy have played on this organ. There is a unique view of London from the sightseeing platform of the dome. A view over the endless sea of houses of the metropolis's 7 million inhabitants. To the north, the vast apartment blocks of the Barbican complex are not to be missed. This area was practically completely flattened in the Second World War. In 1955, rebuilding began. It wasn't finished until the 1980s. The Barbican Centre is hidden in the middle of this concrete jungle, a massive art and conference centre. Both above and below ground, there is the London Symphony Orchestra, the School of Music, the Royal Shakespeare Company, as well as a theatre, restaurants, and a few places to escape from so much culture. The Bank of England was affectionately known as the Old Lady of Threadneedle Street, but serious financial policies are made behind these walls. It is from here that the banking system in Britain is controlled. Originally, the facade just had fake windows. For safety reasons, more floors were added to the building and the interior altered between 2 world wars. The gold reserves of the nation are still to be found in the basement of this building. The Tower of London is the treasure chamber for the crown jewels. 900 years of British history were written in England's most important Norman fortification, and a fair share of it was bloody. Statesmen, monarchs, rebels, the guilty and the innocent were kept prisoner behind these walls. Many of them were executed. The tower also served as a residence, a zoo, and an observatory. The White Tower, erected in 1100, is the focal point. William the Conqueror had the stones from his homeland, Normandy, brought over. He conquered the Anglo-Saxons in 1066 and took the throne. He built numerous defensive bulwarks as a sign of his power. The crown jewels are kept in the jewel house. Gold, pearls, and thousands of precious stones are worked into the royal insignia. And among them, the largest cut diamond in the world, the first star of Africa. Retired soldiers, the yeomen of the guard the tower. They are called beefeaters. The name comes from French and means royal cup bearers. The beefeaters also take care of the ravens. According to legend, if the ravens were to leave the tower, London and the monarchy would founder. The tower is the namesake of the eponymous Tower Bridge built in 1894. Because of the ever heavier traffic, it became necessary by the end of the 19th century to build another bridge across the Thames. Architects Sir Horace Jones and Sir John Wolfe Barry, Westminster's son, won the contract, but with conditions. The hydraulic structures would have to be masked in a neo-Gothic style. Ultimately, the tower and Tower Bridge would have to harmonise. Technically, the construction was a remarkable achievement. The drawbridge made it possible for the large ships to come in further. Today, the bridge looks old-fashioned, but technically it's up to date. In former times, there was a lot to do here. East of Tower Bridge is Docklands, London Harbour, and a symbol of the power of the empire. Most businesses moved here in the 19th century after the old harbour west of Tower Bridge became too small. Vast areas with docking facilities, shipyards, and huge warehouses were built. Thousands of workers with their families lived in the surrounding settlements, many of them in slums, hunting for work every day. At the end of the 60s, a large part of the docks was put out of commission. Transoceanic freighters could no longer anchor in the Thames estuary. By and by, the harbour was moved to Tilbury, 26 kilometres away. The area lay unused for a long time until it was declared a special business zone in Margaret Thatcher's time. A lot of industry, office and apartment complexes were built. The middle point is the 244-metre-high Canary Wharf Tower by the star architect César Pelé. But many projects failed at first. Even the Canary Wharf, with an office area of over 1 million square metres. Since the infrastructure has improved, the buildings can now be rented out. The poorhouse of London, a little bit more to the East End. Illegal dressmakers are hidden behind the facades, backyards, and in the cellars. More than 30,000 Bengalis, Pakistanis, and Indians sew clothing right by Brick Lane for the expensive European boutiques. They work under awful conditions for about £1 an hour and without social insurance. Poverty is a tradition here. The East End has always been a refuge for the poor. More than 1 million people lived here in the most shocking conditions in the 1800s. Overpopulation, illness, and prostitution were rampant. The Salvation Army was founded here in 1878 to try and alleviate the misery. The people lived in a huge slum right at the gates of the world's metropolis. This is where Jack the Ripper made such a ghastly history. 5 prostitutes were murdered here in a barbaric fashion. Then suddenly the murders stopped. He was never caught. It was even alleged that the palace was implicated. Even today, no one knows his real name. Now we are looking over the Thames and we'll put London's suburb Southwark under the magnifying glass. Then we'll look at the wealthy in London's Belgravia. Then on to Madame Tussauds and the Notting Hill Carnival. First, we'll visit Southwark Cathedral. There was already a church here as early as the 7th century. 500 years later, work on the present-day cathedral, the first Gothic church in England, began. But it took generations until it was finally completed. The tower goes back to the 17th century. The main nave was torn down in 1890 for safety reasons. But soon after, an extension in a neo-Gothic style followed. Nowadays, the abbey is the seat of the Anglican Bishop of Southwark. The remains of the original building are still standing, like the arched entrance here, built in the 13th century. This modern church window is also interesting. It depicts characters from Shakespeare's plays. Shakespeare is not buried in the cathedral. However, there is a memorial in the form of an alabaster figure to his work in Southwark. The relief in the background shows the Globe Theatre, opened at the end of the 16th century. Shakespeare was a shareholder and actor there. The Globe Theatre was rebuilt on the original site to the original design. 1,000 members of the audience have seats in this theatre. There is standing for over 500 in the inner court. Performances are during the day. There is no artificial lighting. Incidentally, the globe is called after its advertisement, Atlas, who carries the globe on his shoulders. During a performance in 1613, a cannon set the People's Theatre on fire. It was restored again. The Puritans closed the Den of Vice. The theatre was torn down in 1644. Artists have sponsored the rebuilding with the purchase of a site. In 1997, the first performances took place. Southwark can look back on a long history of theatre. It lay outside the jurisdiction of London during the 16th century. That attracted many actors. The tradition of theatre is nourished even up to today. The construction of the South Bank Arts Centre began in 1951. It brings together numerous concert halls, a gallery for touring exhibition, a film museum, many stages, as well as a large cinema. Accordingly, it is one of the biggest cultural centres in Great Britain. Art lovers should visit Somerset House just opposite. All that is left of the seat of government which once stood by the Thames is this immense building. This is where the Courtauld Institute collection is exhibited. It has many French Impressionist and Post-Impressionist paintings. A little further south of the Thames is the Tate Gallery, founded in 1897. The neoclassical building was funded by the owner of a sugar factory and art lover. He also donated his collection of 65 works of art by English artists to the state. The Tate Gallery houses important paintings by British artists from the 16th century up until the present day. Besides that, it houses the biggest collection of 19th and 20th century art from the Western world. The works of Thomas Gainsborough, Portraits of the Rich, are well worth seeing. The landscape artist, John Constable, belongs to the best known of British artists. Also well known is the pre-Raphaelite, the Italian-born Dante Gabriello Rossetti. And naturally William Turner too. His bequest of 300 oil paintings is the greatest treasure of the museum. Turner himself lived only a few kilometers south of the Thames. He lived in this building for the last 10 years of his life. He died in 1851. Dante Gabriello Rossetti lived just a few houses up the road. Many artists, including T.S. Eliot, lived in this street, Cheyne Walk. Most of them met up in number 50, the King's Head and 8 Bells, a pub built in the 16th century. Some consider this to be the finest part of London. This church was built in the Middle Ages. Most of the other buildings date back to the 18th and 19th century. No wonder that many prosperous British live here. The less well-off are attracted to houseboats which line the banks of the Thames. The truly rich live in elegant Belgravia. Understated elegance at exorbitant prices. That best describes Belgravia, the epitome of British understatement. The terraces, rows of houses having the same facade are typical, all designed by the builder and architect Thomas Cubitt. In the 19th century, he had this marshy land drained, and during the 30s built this elegant suburb for the nobility. This is where the popular series The House on Eaton Place was set. The plot concerned the problems of the employees of a wealthy London family. Nowadays, few ordinary people can afford an apartment here. The prices are virtually unaffordable. Accordingly, most streets have only embassies and business associations. Crescents, curved streets having facades of unified architectural design are typical. Quite often, there are gardens in the middle which are fenced off. Only the residents have the key to these areas. Those who shop in a style befitting their station shop in Sloane Street, the boulevard of elegance. There's everything for high society in the grand shops here. The customers are named after the street, Sloanies, young conservatives from the nobility or the upper middle class with lots of money. Sloane Street leads to Sloane Square, named after the doctor, Dr. Hans Sloane. His natural history collection was among the first of the British Museum's original stock. Sloane Square is in the centre of Chelsea. Besides Belgravia, it is one of the grandest areas in London. Despite this, it has maintained its village character. The hippie movement was at home here during the 1960s. The Rolling Stones lived in Chelsea. Apart from Carnaby Street, the King's Road was the meeting point of the youth scene, swinging London. The loud boutiques made the street the mecca of fashion. Meanwhile, it has lost its image. However, many image-conscious designers have shops here, like Vivienne Westwood, Britain's most sought-after fashion designer. Charles II had the road laid in the 17th century, hence the name. It was a private road requiring, up to the year 1830, a pass to gain access to it. Today, it is the biggest and most popular shopping street in Chelsea. There is just one shop in London which is as British as the Union Jack. Harrods, the famous department store. The enormous terracotta temple dates from the beginning of the 20th century. The fish and meat halls are especially worth seeing. The walls are decorated with Art Nouveau tiles. No wish will be left unfulfilled. There is an overwhelming selection of goods. What with the decoration and the shop windows, one has to leave a lot of time aside to take a stroll through the 300 departments. One needs even more time for the Victoria and Albert Museum. The V&A was founded in 1852 by Prince Albert, the husband of Victoria. Thousands of exhibits from all over the world are on show in its 150 rooms. Sculptures, glass, paintings, silver, weapons, fashion, jewellery and ceramics are displayed here in the biggest museum for applied arts. The exhibition galleries are richly decorated with furniture, interior architecture and design from various epochs. Homage is paid to the arts and crafts movement inspired by the painter, architect and writer William Morris. This former dining room is an excellent example of what he set out to achieve. In the industrialization era, he insisted on quality craftsmanship being appreciated. The Royal Albert Hall is close to the V&A Museum. It is London's most beautiful concert hall. All the world's greats, Verdi, Strauss, and Wagner, have conducted in the so-called soup bowl. They were all infuriated by the obscure echo, but the Londoners take it with a sense of humour. You get double the music for your money. The Hard Rock Cafe is a must for fans of pop music. Rock and pop are celebrated here. The hearts of the fans miss a beat because the walls are covered with photographs, golden discs, musical instruments and memorabilia of famous musicians. There is even a costume from the Beatles. The Hard Rock Cafe is still a tourist attraction, perhaps because in 1971 it was the first restaurant in this chain. The double-decker, like the constant noise of traffic, is a part of London. It is best to take refuge in one of the many parks. With a total area of over 80 square kilometres, they are London's green lungs. Hyde Park, for example, once belonged to Westminster Abbey, but in 1536 Henry VIII took over the cloisters and so the park came into his possession. He is supposed to have hunted wild boar here. The gardens have been open to the public since the 17th century. This is where once the grand bourgeois of London sauntered. Some of them even masked. This is also where they met for duels. Tough-skinned Londoners swim in the man-made lake even on Christmas Day. Even at temperatures under 0 degrees, it is an old tradition. On the northeast corner, everyone can address the public to his heart's content. Just obscene and defamatory statements are forbidden.
Somebody else said with a big bang, and everything came into existence.
Speaker's Corner has existed since 1872. In former times, earnest speeches were made. Engels was one of the speakers. Lenin was in the audience a few years later.
Soldier planted a crown of thorns and pressed it in his head.
But nowadays, Speaker's Corner is just an attraction at weekends.
There on the cross, one mediator between God and man, Christ Jesus.
The Marble Arch is situated diametrically opposite it. The triumphal arch was meant to be the main entrance gate to Buckingham Palace, but what a shame. The royal coaches couldn't fit through. So the arch, made of white Italian marble, was brought here. A few meters further, the public executions took place for 600 years, murder and crime. That had always interested him as well, Sherlock Holmes. His creator, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, had the detective living in 221B Baker Street. There is even a museum here. One of the most famous museums is Madame Tussauds Waxworks Museum. In 1802, Madame Tussaud left her husband in Paris and moved to London. Her luggage, 35 wax figures. The graceful artist toured through Great Britain with them. These images are still fascinating. Every year, 12 figures are added. Some are exchanged as well. More wax had to be added to Helmut Kohl, the former Chancellor of Germany. Boris Becker and Jürgen Klinsmann can be seen as well. Two Germans who made sport history in Great Britain. Park Crescent is very close. The curved line of houses should have the beginning of a garden's quarter. The Prince Regent, later known as George IV, and John Nash designed this concept. Architecture and cultivated nature were to complete each other here. This ambitious project was never completed. In spite of all, Regent's Park was formed, London's most recent park. The architectural highlight in the east of the park is Cumberland Terraces. This building complex isn't one of John Nash's grandest projects. Luxury apartments are hidden behind the classical facade. Finally, we visit the district known as Notting Hill, with the famous Portobello Market. On Saturdays, the flea market can be a treasure trove for antique collectors. An English seaman who bought a farm there in the 18th century started the business. Lots of visitors, having traveled a great deal, paid for food and service with exotic souvenirs. So his Portobello farm became a trading place for various odds and ends. Every year in August, the Notting Hill Carnival takes place here. It is one of the world's biggest city festivals. More than 1 million visitors turn up to celebrate for 3 days. Notting Hill is the part of the city which has been inhabited by black people the longest. In the 50s, many inhabitants of Trinidad in the Caribbean moved there. In 1960, they began the carnival. Shining examples were the rhythms, dances, and pageants of their former home. A high percentage of the youth in this area is unemployed. The carnival offers them the opportunity to develop their creativity. The nicest costumes and the best bands are awarded prizes. In spite of the Caribbean roots, another 150 different ethnic groups living in the neighborhood have put their stamp on the carnival. That's what London is about. Hundreds of nations from all over the world have made the British capital what it is today, one of the most exciting places in the world.